Coming up, a tribute to a silent key. Hi, I'm Michael, W9IXG, your host for Ham Radio Q&A. I'm on a mission to inspire and educate the amateur radio community, so if this is your first time watching, please consider hitting that subscribe button. Well, I seldom eulogize people, but back in August, we lost a great person. Don Michalski, W9IXG. He was a selfless volunteer, mentor, teacher, and promoter of amateur radio. I don't know if the call sign W9IXG sounds familiar to you or not. He was very active on the Badger Weather Net on the early mornings. He was the ARRL Wisconsin Section Manager from 1999 to 2015. You know, it's easy to tell when a person has had such a profound impact on the community. The way I first heard of his passing was from numerous sources, all saddened by the news of his passing. I first met Don back in the early 2000s. He recruited me to be a part of the communications team for a statewide bicycle tour. I also worked with him in a leadership capacity with Wisconsin Aries Races. Not only was he passionate about amateur radio and bicycling, both two passions of mine, Don was also very smart. He was an associate in the Astronomy department of the University of Wisconsin. He was a project manager that had several of his projects fly on the space shuttle and also installed on the Hubble Space Telescope. But he was also a humble man and not one to ever boast about his accomplishments. Don personified amateur radio and the amateur radio code. We paid tribute to Don Michalski at the 2018 Wisconsin State Aries Leadership Conference on October 13th, 2018. So what follows are a series of reminiscences and eulogies that illustrate his impact and legacy, both personally and for the greater good of amateur radio. 73 W9IXG and QRT.
So Don, I met Don when I took the type license 20 years ago, and there was such a synergy between the two of us that he would become one of the most influential people in my life. I can honestly say I would not be standing here right now. I would not be the role that I'm in Aries Races. I would not be as active as I am if I had not met Don. Maybe it's because we also shared a passion for cycling. Don was an active cyclist, and he was a strong rider. And strong riders we call hammerheads, and that was Don. Don could easily hammer out an 80-mile day on the saddle of his bicycle. He loved to bike to work every day. Even in the winter, he would bike to work. And he averaged around 4,000 miles a year on his bike. So he was loving his biking. And one of his favorite trips was one that he took to France. And Don really enjoyed the best of life. But Don was a high energy and passionate person, and the state of Wisconsin really seemed to be his playground. He loved meeting people and traveling the state. And as your section manager, he traveled the state a lot. I have no idea how many miles he put on his car a year. But he traveled the state to meet with you and talk with you and be involved. Yeah, Don really epitomized public service. He put the safety of others as his highest regard. He combined his love of cycling and ham radio by organizing ham radio support for 6 to 7 cycling events every year. His tactical call was not Air Boss, it was SAG 1. Because Don would absolutely refuse to be in a stationary position. He insisted to be on the road, helping people, fixing flats, doing what was ever needed to be out there keeping people safe. Out there in all sorts of weather, in the heat, in the rain, in the cold, taking care of the riders till the last ones are safely in. And sometimes Don would get so focused on taking care of others, he'd forget to eat. But we tried to help him with that. As your section manager from 1999 to 2015, Don, in his dedication and commitment to public service, helped provide a strong foundation for Wisconsin Area Tracy's. And that's why it was unanimous to permanently change the Senior Leadership Award to the Don Michalski Leadership Award. It was truly an honor to work with Don as part of Wisconsin Area Tracy's leadership. We salute you, Don. Thank you, Don. We appreciate the good times and the laughter too. But thank you, Don, for your many contributions to ham radio and to Wisconsin Area Tracy's. And now I'd like to call up to the microphone Bill, KB9ENO.
Thanks, Kathy.
You're welcome.
Hey, everyone. I never quite expected to be here in this capacity and making a tribute to Don. Lisa and Mark and Matthias, Don was a special guy to me, and I want to tell you a little bit about that. So, Don, from an amateur radio perspective, was a section manager. I can't think of anyone over the course of my coming up on 30 years now in ham radio who has been more influential and had an impact in ham radio than Don. So as section emergency coordinator, Don provided just tremendous support. And we had a matter that we dealt with twice, and anybody from East Central Wisconsin who's been around for a while, you know what I'm talking about. And this got very political, and Don was the stabilizing force. He was really the rock in all of that. And you know, I'm sure that's not something you really shared and talked about, but I was fairly new in my role at the point, and I was looking for somebody for advice and support, which is exactly what a leader is supposed to provide. And that's absolutely what Don did. Don was also a visionary. So I think, Kyle, you mentioned this earlier. It's not something that I don't think is widely known, but Don was one of the most influential people in creating WECOM. He was one of the initial investors in WECOM and really got it to where it is today. So Don was able to live to see the fully designed and operable system, and that was fantastic. So the other thing is about Don, and Kathy, you mentioned this, is Don would roll up his sleeves and jump into things. He wasn't just a leader, but he was really the example for all of us. And WECOM would not have Cambridge and Dodgeville today if it weren't for Don. He really single-handedly secured those sites for us and made it happen. So, you know, there are a lot of stories, and I'm not going to really go into too many, but one of the things that I always remember about Don is his dedication. And, you know, when you're building systems and doing things that, you know, require maintenance, sometimes things happen at 2 o'clock in the morning. And Don was always there to answer a phone and to find a solution to take care of a problem. So that's one thing that I'll always remember about Don. So, you know, now we'll go on without him. And Lisa and Mark and Matthias, I'm sure you can attest to this, but, you know, everybody who knew Don can really take a part of him with us, because he's become part of us. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Bill. Now I'd like Patrick, KA1RB.
Well, good morning or good noon to everyone. I came to Wisconsin from Maryland, and one of the first things I did when I came to Wisconsin was look for an amateur radio relationship of some sort, and there was a ham fest going on, and I went to it and met this fella, He started talking to me about my interest in ham radio, what I was doing, and everything else. The whole thing was all about me. Every time he asked a question, every time he said something, it was not something that he was doing or anything. It was all about what are you doing? How are you working with ham radio? What are you doing? Turns out I was doing some official observer type of things, and I just need one. I need one in this location. Can you do this? Can you do that? He was always driving to get things done, and it was pretty special. I think the best description of what Don did was he really enlisted people to do things for ham radio. It wasn't doing it for him; it was doing it for ham radio in general, and that's been his driving force pretty much all along. At one point, he turned around and said, could you be a section manager? I didn't have a choice. I had to say yes. So that's he foiled me onto you guys. So now you have to put up with it. But anyway, I really appreciate what Don did for ham radio in general while I was just learning about Wisconsin. And he certainly has driven me to try to do the best I can for what's going on here.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you.
Next up is Dwight, AG9G.
Well, the previous speakers here pretty much said what I was going to cover too about Don, but I'm Dwight, AG9G. Many of you probably don't know me, but anyway, I first met Don in 1999, just after he became section manager. Sort of the same way Bill met him at, at the swap fest, and just got to be. Don wanted to know all about you, about me. So, but anyway, I got to know Don better, and I've always considered it a great privilege that he considered me one of his friends because of what we did on the Badger WeatherNet. One of Don's other passions was the Badger WeatherNet, and I was fortunate enough that I was a net control on Fridays, and Don always was the pickup station on Fridays, so we had a 2.5-hour relationship every Friday with handling weather traffic. But anyway, Kathy asked me to say a little bit here, and I was trying to think, boy, what can I say about Don that everybody else doesn't know about him? But I just thought I'd give a little history of the Badger WeatherNet and how Don, when he took over, how things progressed from there. But first of all, I'd like to thank the Michalski family for sharing Don with us for 17 years. We were family and he was family. I looked back last weekend at my logbooks, and Don first started checking into the Badger WeatherNet in February of 2001 and was just giving weather reports. But within probably 3 or 4 months, according to my logbooks, Don was already acting as a pickup station where he collected the weather reports and would get them to the National Weather Service. And he was also acting as a net control station. The Badger WeatherNet started back in the 1960s, and I became active within the Badger WeatherNet in about 1976. Another person that had a lot of passion for the Badger WeatherNet at that time was a person named Jim Caldwell, WB9YPY. And for many years, he was the pickup station. Every morning, 7 days a week, Jim was available and picked up weather reports. And then after Jim sort of passed it along, there was another station, N9GJI. He lived in Iola, and he picked up weather reports for many years. But during that period of time, when originally we were only a 15-minute net, 7 o'clock till 7:15, but as things grew, We expanded the net time until it was an hour and 15 minutes, and then it went to 2 hours and 15 minutes. But anyway, these two stations, WB9YPY and NIGJI, they would take our reports and they would actually phone them on the phone down to the National Weather Service, and those weather reports were given to them over the phone. In the 80s, we transitioned to where they were sending them on fax machine. In the 90s, we had, and I'm going to miss a lot of stations here, but it was really cool looking through my logbooks and all the great people that were involved. But in the 90s, the National Weather Service wanted to transition to where we were sending the reports in via modem. So, and at that time, we had probably 2 or 3 stations that were actively picking up reports, more than just the one person. But again, here was a change of technology, and we had older retired gentlemen. So we had to actually get the fax machines when they had fax machines. We actually had to get our PCs when they had PCs. And now these guys had to not only learn PCs, but a meteorologist at the National Weather Service had created an app that they could use so that the PCs would interface directly with the National Weather Service. So they had to learn that too. So we were in a big transition period in the late 1990s, and again, we had some great people on the net, and we kept plugging along. But this digital age was doing its thing to us, and when Don came aboard, he sort of jumped right in and started helping the guys understand how to set up their computers and to get this traffic in there and actually help get some of the bugs out of the program that we were using to send the data in. Then according to my logbook, in 2002, our net manager at that time, W9IXG, whose name at that time was Gus, and it's John's father, he was net manager, but because of health reasons and eventually passing away, he wasn't able to continue as net manager. Well, here comes Don. Here comes Don, and he jumps right in to become net manager, and lock, stock, and barrel. And again, we were in this big transition period, and Don, the leader that he was able to get everything, the transition completed, and things running very efficiently. Bill mentioned that Don led by example, and it was the same way on the Badger WeatherNet. He was there every day, a lot of times getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning just to make sure that the net controls and the pickup stations who were starting at 5 o'clock were there and available. He was always there at the end of the net to pick up the net reports. I guess the one thing with Don, he did a lot of things behind the scenes. There was he did them quietly. He did them without fanfare, but things got done. And as a net control operator for many years in all the pickup stations, Don always let us know that he really appreciated what we were doing. He always was there to help us, but he always made sure that we knew that what we were doing was very much appreciated. And then that carried over to the people that were checking in with weather reports. Don would let them know that the data that we were giving the National Weather Service was very important and that they really appreciated it. Being the engineer that he was, Don wanted to make sure that our reports were accurate. So there was a period of time where, you used whatever you had, but as we progressed and our data was, or as Don was net manager, we became more focused on being accurate. So our temperatures and our precipitation reports were of much use to the National Weather Service. Don did little things. So like one time I dropped one of my rain gauge and I told Don, well, I can't report precipitation for a few days because I got to order a new rain gauge. Well, the next day, here's this box in the mail. Well, I only missed one day of reporting weather because Don had some spare ones that he'd send out once in a while. So that was Don. But I'm glad we're honoring Don. There's a lot of things on the Badger WeatherNet that, a lot of people didn't realize, but behind the scenes, Don took care of it. He made sure that we were all, knew that we were needed. Our reports were good. And unfortunately in 2017, probably because of budget cuts and several other things, the National Weather Service wanted to make changes again. And with the system that we were using to report, it was probably no longer feasible to get into the government computers and stuff like that. So our reports were no longer being accepted by them, but Don worked very hard trying to find ways that we could interface with the National Weather Service. And I think Don put a lot of effort into it, and there was probably not a lot of response from the National Weather Service. So I think one of the disappointments was that Don wasn't able to get us to continue using our reports. But we continued on as the Badger WeatherNet, and when Don passed away, the net controls, we've all decided that it's still an important net to keep in service. I'll take any of our pickup stations for picking up traffic in really bad conditions. Every morning, we fight it every morning. We talk about G1 and G2 magnetic storms, and we've been there and done that. And it was mentioned about WECOM. I knew early on one of Don's visions was to have a VHF network that we could use as a backup for our reports. And we thank the WECOM people for letting us do that in the morning. It's a lifesaver. And I know Don was a big part of that. So anyway, thanks for honoring him, and sorry it took so long.
Fine. Thank you, Dwight. Yeah, Dwight, you know, I appreciate all your comments, and Don was like Mr. Network, and he connected us all with everybody we know in ham radio. Okay, next I would like Denny, K9LGU, to come up.
Hi. I've been at this a long time, as you know. I've served 4 different section managers. I've been section traffic manager for them, and I was for Don for his entire reign. And I've learned a number of things, and one of them applies especially right here today. And that is, a real hero may die nobly for a cause, or live humbly for one. Don devoted his life to service of his family, his friends, his colleagues, his country, and he did it without fanfare, without ulterior reasons. He had no motivation beyond his caring for others. When we worked together on projects like the Trek 100, Don was always positive, always encouraging. One year, even after making some training videos, carefully explaining all the procedures, the ride started, and some of the operators in the SAGs didn't follow the directions. Don tried gentle corrections, rolled his eyes, and then he did the adjusting, rather than disrupt the process and make them do it. When he heard someone needed help, he helped. I remember when he stopped at KA9BAE's house because he was having antenna problems. Don fixed them. Did WECOM need some help in the middle of the night to climb the tower at Cambridge? Yes, that was Don. In his quiet leadership by example, Don was truly motivational. He didn't refer to his research or his public service events, his awards, his scientific contributions, or even his bowling trophies. He didn't need to. He taught us by his actions. And that's why establishing an award named after him is so appropriate, and it's also why I so deeply miss my friend.
Thank you, Denny. Next, I'd like to have Sam, KG9NG. KG9, nice guy.
No good.
No, I'm not going to say that. Here, I'll give you the microphone. Yes.
Gee, you wear them on the Price is Right or something? Anyway, thanks very much, Kathy. When Kathy asked me to say something, I said, well, of course, but I didn't know what I was going to say, and I still don't. There are just too many stories. But I do recall that I'd been out somewhere out west or something and come back, got back to Madison, went to Space Place for a meeting, or actually a lecture, and Jim Laz came up to me and said, have you heard that Don passed away? And I had just gotten back in town and of course hadn't. And he said, well, I don't want to say anything until we can be sure that it did happen. Well, it turns out that it did happen, unfortunately. And I do remember, though, that just before I got back to Madison, I was in Denver, Colorado, in a traffic jam, and the cell phone rings, and it was Don. And Don wanted to know the number of my friend Paulette's because she was going to be helping with a event, and he needed a little bit more information. Well, that was him. He was always looking to get everything working as well as possible. I saw him mention also that I'd had trouble with my Kenwood radio, and that did he have any ideas what it was? And he says, well, I don't know, but I'll loan you mine until yours can get fixed. Unfortunately, I never heard from him again. But I did buy the radio from his estate, and I really appreciate you people for letting me have it. And I do use it, and I try to get on the WebNet every once in a while, too. Some of these pictures you see me fairly obvious, because I think I'm the only one who's really that active around here that uses a wheelchair. I really can walk, I just like to use the chair. No, actually, I can walk with crutches, but the problem is you can't carry anything, so this works out a lot better. But it seemed like every time that I would ask Don a question, he would have an answer, or he would know where to get the answer. And that's sometimes a lot better than knowing everything yourself and telling you, oh, this is the way it is. He would tell you how to find out the answer, and that was much more important, I think. The fact that you see me on a lot of these things is anytime he asked me to do something, I couldn't say no. So I was on the WebNet, I was on one of Kathy's tours of 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 of them, because Don asked, and he had that way of emphasizing that you should help out without insisting. So I think one of the main things that I learned about Don is that I don't think I ever asked him anything that he didn't say yes to, or he wouldn't tell me how I could do it. And at the same time, as a true leader, I don't think he ever asked me to do anything that I didn't do for him. And for that, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Next, I would like Joe, N9TWA.
So I'm not sure when the first time it was that I met Don, and I'll get back to that at the very end here. But like everyone else, did remark how low-key he was and how encouraging he was. And it's like, Joe, we really need you to be net control for this public service event. And sometimes I had to say no because I was already committed, but it was always, we really need you, and you're the right person for the job. And it was very, very hard to resist that. And I think that helped go a long way towards getting the kind of cooperation that he really needed for the section. Just a couple things on antenna-wise. Out at Dane County Emergency Management, they put in a new building, and we had to get antennas up onto the roof. And that's also the county jail. And so that was sort of interesting going up with Don and one of the deputies, because we had to get rid of my Swiss Army knife and everything else and go through the locked doors and talk to the elevator and tell them where we wanted to go, and found out that if you get up on the roof, you can't get back in. So we had to prop doors open, which was interesting. Likewise, up on State EOC, Daniel W9IXG, and I went up and re-straightened the antenna up there. And I mentioned Daniel because for those who don't know the history of some of the Cambridge repeater, Daniel was in Cambridge resident at the time, and they had a Community Hope bike ride and walk event. And I was in net control for that, the first net control, and Daniel and I spent a lot of time trying to figure out where the stations were going to be. Could we hit the Jefferson repeater? Could we hit the Madison repeater? And no, we couldn't reliably hit either one. So for the first couple of years, we ran this as a simplex net. There's no reason we can't do that. I think a lot of folks aren't used to doing that, but it worked just fine. But Don saw this water tower north of town and said that'd be a great place to put a repeater. So set up a repeater there, and eventually when WECOM was organized, that was one of the first repeaters that we had. Going back on things, about a year ago, a little bit of a bittersweet memory, I was cleaning through my files, and I found a newsletter for the Bombay Bicycle Club, which was probably the biggest bicycle club in Madison. I think they still are close to that. And it's from 1986, and there's Don's picture on the front cover as one of the officers. And I at least got to give that to him last November. And he was surprised at how he looked. He looks actually about the same, except his hair is a lot darker. So that was pretty cool.
Oh, thank you, Joe.
And now Bob, WB9 And we're probably going to go over a little bit with the door prizes, but this has been a wonderful sharing, and I'm so thrilled that you're here.
Go for it.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Bob, WB9RND, from the Madison area, and Don as well. And there are a lot of public service events down in the Madison area, so Don had the chance to touch dozens of operators' lives through his example and his direct support. I asked a bunch of operators, if they had stories to share, and there are a couple that came to the forefront, so I'll read one of them and make reference to another one. This is from John Lalande. Don was one of the driving forces in keeping W9YT on the air. When he finished climbing the tower atop the Engineering Research Building to reset W9YT's HF antenna, high winds had knocked the antenna out of position, preventing us from turning it with the rotor. I would guess I was 30 years junior to Don, and I think this may have been the first time I met him. And I was impressed to see him climb up this tower atop a 15-story building like it was no big deal. And I was glad he was able to do it because I was happy to be able to use the station again, and tower climbing does not appeal to me. I was licensed in 2013, so I only got to know Don in the past few years after I started getting involved with W9YT and volunteering for some of the public service events he coordinated, amateur radio support for. But I was really impressed by how generous Don was with his time, both with the Badger Amateur Radio Society and with the numerous public service events he helped coordinate amateur radio support for. So that was from John Lalande, and there's Don in typical fashion, not being afraid of anything to get the job done. On a personal note, my wife Wendy, KC9VIO, and I knew Don from primarily working with public service events, bike rides and things like that, either actively involved in helping with the event or actually participating in the event. So we've had the chance to, experience him from the service side of things and his coordination and his go power, and both being a direct beneficiary of the support. In fact, one of us, our first encounter with him was when she needed a ride to the next rest stop on a bike ride. Don was always on the go. He was always even though he'd coordinate the event, he didn't lead the event except by example. He was always the first one out and the last one back in at the end of the night, which is why it was kind of interesting and odd that the last event that we helped with, he wasn't the last one back that day. So we knew maybe something was kind of going on but Don didn't make a fuss about himself. That's just the way he was. He was more concerned that everybody else was taken care of, and he'd kind of find a way to take care of himself. On the professional side, I didn't know what motivated Don to be involved in the astronomy lab at UW-Madison. I don't know if he had some kind of spiritual quest to connect with the God who made everything, or if he was just naturally curious about the world and the universe in which he lived. But I kind of group him in with all the other explorers and leaders that just had to find out what was going on in the universe, how things worked. And through his work with Whoopi and Hubble and other activities like that, the world and us as individuals have benefited from his efforts and his devotion to his skill, his craft, and his cause. And we are honored to have known him and count him as one of our good friends. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We're getting really close to 1 o'clock, and I'm in triage with Josh. I don't know how we're doing door prizes, but does anyone else have anything they'd like to share? I will say that at one point when I was driving with Don to a ham fest, I asked him, so how did you get into ham radio? Or why did you get into ham radio? And I remember him telling me it was so that he could talk to his mom on the air when he was driving the state. And I thought, wow. And family was really important to Don. It's like everything was important to Don. And again, we're honored, so honored to have his family here today. Thank you for sharing this with us. It means so much for us that you're here. And thank you for everyone for being who you are and doing what you do and saying your part today about Don. We appreciate it. So Don, we love you, and we'll look forward someday to this gentleman being W9IXG. We'll look forward to hearing that on the air. And 88 Don, you're always in our heart and you're always in our thoughts whenever we're going backwards with the slides. I forgot to do slides with ham radio. Thanks, Don, for everything. So thank you very much.